I'm telling this from a small apartment in Toronto, yeah. I'm back in Canada. And I never thought I'd be saying this out loud, but it all started with one email. Just one. It came in on a quiet Monday morning. I remember the time because I just poured my coffee, about to reply to some old clients who still think I'm running my small electrical business. The subject line just said, "About Mylan." No greeting. No signature. And it wasn't even from her. It was from a guy named Chris, some American backpacker I barely remembered meeting once. I opened it, confused. 5 lines. That's all it took to pull the ground out from under me. "Hey Tom, sorry if this is awkward, but you should know. Maylin's not who you think. She's been seeing my friend too. Told him the same stories she told you. Just thought you deserved to know." I felt my hands go cold. Like someone had hit pause on the world. Maylin. The girl who knew how I took my coffee. The one who remembered I didn't like sugar because, "You like it bitter?" she'd say, smiling like it meant something deeper. So many nights we sat in that little cafe in Chiang Mai, laughing like we'd both survived something big. I thought maybe I had. I thought she was real. If you're watching this, do me a favor. Hit like, drop a comment, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you've been here before, seriously, super thank you for sticking with me. You're why I can even tell this story at all. What happened next changed everything. But to understand it, I have to take you back to where it all started. "You look tired today," she said that morning, the morning everything still felt possible. I was tired of being alone in a studio apartment that smelled like instant noodles and regret. But when she said it, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me the cup, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, like someone actually saw me. Long night, I told her, which was true. I'd been lying awake thinking about how she'd started leaving her toothbrush next to mine, how she'd begun calling my place home when she talked to her family on the phone. Small things that felt enormous when you'd been living like a ghost for 2 years. "I made extra rice," she said, sitting down across from me. She did that now, took her break when I came in. "You should eat more. You're too thin." I wasn't too thin. I was exactly what 47 looks like when you stop caring about yourself. But the way she said it, like it mattered to her, like my health was something worth worrying about, that's what got me. That's what made me think, maybe this wasn't just another expat fairy tale heading for disaster. "You don't have to take care of me," I said, but I wanted her to. God help me, I wanted someone to care if I ate breakfast or got enough sleep or came home safe from the markets where I wandered aimlessly most days, trying to feel like I belonged somewhere. "I want to," she said, and her hand covered mine on the table. That's what people do when they care about each other. Care about each other. Such simple words, but they hit me like a confession, because I did care about her, more than I'd admitted to myself. More than was probably smart for a middle-aged Canadian sitting in a Thai cafe pretending he wasn't just another lonely expat looking for someone to make his exile feel like a choice instead of a retreat. "Maylin," I started, but she shook her head. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "You think this is temporary. You think I'm going to disappear one day." She was right. I did think that. Every expat learns to expect it. The girl who seems too good to be true usually is. But sitting there, watching her trace circles on my palm with her finger, I wanted to believe. I wanted to trust that the way she looked at me meant something. That when she stayed over and made breakfast and folded my clothes alongside hers, it wasn't performance. It was just life. Normal life. The kind I'd forgotten existed. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "You're stuck with me now." I should have asked her why. Why me? Why now? Why a burned-out electrician from Edmonton who had nothing to offer except loneliness and a bank account that wasn't empty yet? But I didn't ask, because I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I kissed her hand and told myself that sometimes good things happen to people who've had enough bad things. Sometimes the universe decides you've paid your dues. Walking back to the apartment, our apartment, I was starting to think of it that way. I felt something I barely recognized. Hope. Actual hope, not the desperate kind that keeps you buying lottery tickets, but the quiet kind that makes you think about the future without wincing. Maybe I could build something here. Maybe we could build something. The morning air was thick and warm, typical for Chiang Mai in the rainy season, but it felt different when you weren't walking alone, when you knew someone was waiting for you to come home. When home meant more than four walls and a bed you made for one person. That was the morning I thought it was real. That was the morning I convinced myself that love could happen twice in one lifetime, even to someone like me who'd already wasted his first chance. 3 months earlier, I was a different kind of lost. The kind that orders the same coffee every morning just to have somewhere to be. The kind that strikes up conversations with baristas because it's the only human contact you get between sunrise and sunset in a foreign country where you don't speak the language and don't understand the customs and don't have a single person who'd notice if you just disappeared. Black coffee, no sugar, I said to the girl behind the counter that first day. Standard order, nothing special. You sure? She asked, already reaching for the pot. Most foreigners want it sweet. Most foreigners. I wasn't most foreigners, but I didn't know how to explain that. Didn't know how to say that I'd come to Thailand because my ex-wife had cleaned out our joint account and moved to Vancouver with her yoga instructor, leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't afford and the kind of emptiness that makes you sell everything you own and buy a one-way ticket to anywhere that isn't where you used to be. I'm sure, I said. She poured the coffee, black as motor oil, and handed it over with a smile that seemed genuine. Not the practiced customer service smile I'd gotten used to at the hotel, not the pitying smile locals gave obvious refugees like me. Just friendly. I'm Malin, she said. Ronald. Ron? Ronald's fine. And that was it. First conversation. Nothing profound, nothing romantic. Just coffee and introductions and the kind of small talk you make when you're both killing time. But she remembered my name the next day. Remembered how I liked my coffee. Started asking how I was settling in, if I'd found an apartment yet, if I needed recommendations for anything. You've been here 2 weeks, she observed one morning, about a week after that first conversation. Most expats find their group by now. I'm not much of a group person, I told her, which was true. I'd tried the weekly expat meetups at the other cafe down the street. Bunch of guys my age complaining about their ex-wives and comparing stories about Thai girlfriends who were probably using them for visa money. I lasted exactly 1 beer before making excuses and leaving. Me either, Malin said, wiping down the counter. Groups are complicated. That's when I started really looking at her. Really paying attention. She was young, early 20s I guessed, but there was something older in her eyes. Something careful. Like she'd learned to watch people before deciding what to show them. How long have you worked here? I asked. 2 years, since I finished school. You're not from Chiang Mai? Bangkok, originally. Came here for university. Stayed for the job market. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Better opportunities, they said. There was a story there, but I didn't push. I was learning that pushing for stories in Thailand was like pushing for rain. It happened when it happened, not when you wanted it to. But she started telling me anyway. Little pieces over the next few weeks. How she sent money to her family back in Bangkok. How her younger brother was in school and needed help with tuition. How her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her responsible for siblings who were still figuring out how to be adults. That's a lot of responsibility, I said one morning when she'd mentioned sending half her paycheck home. It's family, she said simply. What else would I do? I didn't have an answer for that. My family consisted of an ex-wife who'd blocked my number and a sister in Toronto who sent Christmas cards and nothing else. The concept of people depending on you, really depending on you, was foreign to me. Maybe that's why it impressed me so much. Here was this young woman, working 6 days a week in a cafe, supporting people she barely got to see, doing it without complaint or resentment. You're a good person, I told her that day. She looked up from the espresso machine, surprised. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough. And I thought I did. I thought I could see who she really was underneath the cheerful barista routine. Someone who'd grown up too fast, but hadn't let it make her bitter. Someone who understood responsibility and sacrifice. Someone who might understand why a middle-aged Canadian would start over in a place where nothing was familiar and nobody knew his history. "Why Thailand?" she asked me a few days later, during one of our morning conversations that had become routine. "Needed a change," I said. "From what?" I could have told her the whole story. The marriage that died slowly over 15 years. The business that never quite made enough money. The house that felt like a prison, and the friends who chose sides when everything fell apart. But I didn't want to be that guy, the bitter expat who unloads his sob story on the first friendly local who'll listen. "From who I used to be," I said instead. She nodded like that made perfect sense. "Sometimes you have to go far away to figure out who you really are." "Is that what you did?" "In a way. Bangkok me was different, more naive. Thought everything would work out if I just tried hard enough." "And Chiang Mai, you?" "Knows better, but still tries hard enough." That's when I started falling for her, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Not the moment when she smiled or touched my hand or said something flirty. It was that conversation about trying hard enough, even when you know better. It was the recognition that we were both people who'd been broken down and rebuilt ourselves somewhere else. But rebuilding yourself is lonely work. And when someone comes along who seems to understand that, who seems to see the person you're trying to become instead of the person you used to be, it's easy to mistake recognition for love. Easy to think that understanding someone's pain means you're meant to heal it together. The first time she didn't answer her phone, I told myself she was busy. Malin had moved in 3 weeks earlier, slowly at first, a toothbrush, then a change of clothes, then half her closet and a claim on the left side of my bed. She'd quit the cafe 2 weeks after that, said she was tired of waking up before dawn to serve coffee to tourists who didn't tip and complained about everything. "I want to take care of you," she'd said, lying against my chest in the dark. "Let me take care of you for a while." I should have asked what that meant. Exactly. Should have asked how she planned to contribute to rent and groceries and the electric bill that kept climbing every month. But she was running her fingers through the gray hair on my chest, calling me her guardian, and I was 57 years old and in love for the first time since my 20s. Logic wasn't exactly my strong suit. So when she said she needed to go see her Aunt Knock about some family business and would be gone most of the afternoon, I said okay. When her phone went straight to voicemail for 6 hours, I told myself Thai families talk for a long time. When she came home after dark looking flushed and tired, I asked if everything was all right and believed her when she said yes. "Aunt Knock is getting old," she explained, setting her phone face down on the kitchen counter. "She talks and talks, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I'd never met Aunt Knock, never been introduced to any of Malin's family despite living together for a month. But that seemed normal for Thailand. Family was complicated, relationships moved slowly, cultural differences meant I shouldn't expect to be included in everything right away. "Maybe I could meet her sometime," I suggested. "Maybe," Malin said, but she was already moving toward the bathroom. "I need a shower. That house is so dusty." She was in the shower for 45 minutes. I counted because I was sitting on the couch waiting for her to come back so we could eat the dinner I'd picked up from the night market. When she finally emerged, hair wrapped in a towel and skin pink from the hot water, she seemed different, distracted. "You okay?" I asked. "Just tired," she said, curling up beside me on the couch. "Family stuff is exhausting." I put my arm around her and we ate pad thai from paper containers while watching a Thai drama on the television. She translated the important parts for me, laughed at the melodramatic storylines, laid her head on my shoulder during the commercial breaks. Everything was normal, except for the way she kept checking her phone every few minutes, screen lighting up her face in the dim room. "Popular tonight," I joked. "Just my brother," she said, turning the phone face down again. "He worries too much." This became the pattern. Malin would disappear for hours at a time to visit Aunt Knock or help her brother with something or run errands that seemed to take much longer than errands should take. She'd come home tired and distracted and wanting to shower immediately. Her phone, which used to sit openly on whatever surface was nearby, was now always face down, always silent, always off limits. When I asked about her day, she gave vague answers. Boring family stuff. Just errands. You wouldn't be interested. When I suggested coming along sometimes, she said Thai families were private about outsiders, even boyfriends. When I mentioned that we'd been together for 2 months and I'd never met any of these relatives she spent so much time with, she said I was being jealous and paranoid. This isn't Canada, she told me one night after I'd asked why she couldn't just text instead of disappearing for entire afternoons. Family is different here, more complicated. She was right, of course. I was being jealous and paranoid. I was applying Western relationship expectations to a Thai woman who had responsibilities I didn't understand and cultural obligations that had nothing to do with me. I was being exactly the kind of controlling expat boyfriend I'd seen at those meetups, complaining about girlfriends who had lives outside of their relationships. But love makes you notice things even when you don't want to. Makes you see patterns even when you're actively trying not to see them. And the pattern I was starting to see was that Malin had 2 phones. The iPhone she used when we were together, and an older Samsung that appeared sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. 2 phones, and a lot of conversations she didn't want me to overhear, and family members I was never going to meet. I trust you, I told myself every morning when she left, and every evening when she came home. Love requires trust. But trust is different from denial. Trust means believing someone despite uncertainty. Denial means refusing to acknowledge what you're seeing because acknowledgement would require action, and action would require courage, and courage might mean losing the person you've convinced yourself you can't live without. I was not trusting Malin. I was denying her. There's a difference, though I wouldn't understand it until much later. Until after everything fell apart and I was sitting alone in this same cafe, watching the rain and trying to figure out how I'd become the kind of man who mistakes willful blindness for love. The morning she made me breakfast and told me I looked tired, the morning I thought everything was finally real, that was the morning after I'd found her second Facebook account on the old Samsung. The account with photos I'd never seen and friends I didn't recognize and relationship status listed as single. I'd confronted her about it the night before, voice shaking with something between anger and fear. It's old, she'd said, not even looking up from her phone. I forgot to delete it. The last post is from 3 days ago. I use it to keep in touch with old friends, people I knew before I met you. Why didn't you tell me about it? Because you would react exactly like this. She was crying by then, or pretending to cry, and I was apologizing for snooping and promising to trust her more, and agreeing that I was being paranoid and possessive. We made love that night with a desperation that should have been another red flag, but I interpreted it as passion, as proof that we could work through anything as long as we were honest with each other. Honest with each other. I was the only one being honest, but I was too in love to see it. Too afraid of being alone again to recognize that I already was. She was crying when I got home from the market that afternoon. Not the frustrated crying from our fight about the Facebook account, not the emotional crying that sometimes happened when she talked about her parents. This was different. Broken, desperate. What's wrong? I asked, dropping the grocery bags and moving toward the couch where she sat hunched over her phone. My brother, she said through the tears. He's in the hospital. I felt my stomach drop. Despite all my paranoia about her mysterious family obligations, I'd never doubted that her brother existed or that she loved him. She talked about him constantly, how smart he was, how hard he worked in school, how much he reminded her of their father. What happened? Motorcycle accident, she said, showing me her phone. The screen was in Thai, but I could see it was a message thread with someone. He was going to work and a truck hit him. They took him to the hospital, but we don't have insurance. Good insurance. I knew enough about Thai healthcare to understand what that meant. Public hospitals were cheap but overcrowded. Private hospitals were excellent but expensive. If you wanted proper care, fast care, the kind of care that might save your life or prevent permanent damage, you paid for it up front. How much? I asked. 40,000 baht for the surgery. Maybe more for recovery. 40,000 baht. About 1,500 Canadian dollars. Not nothing, but not impossible either. I had savings, the money from selling my house back in Edmonton. Money I'd been living on while I figured out what to do with my life in Thailand. We can handle that, I told her. Ronald, no. She was shaking her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. That's too much. I can't ask you for that much money. You're not asking. I'm offering. It's not your responsibility. You're my responsibility, I said, sitting down beside her and pulling her against my chest. Your family is my responsibility now. That's when the crying really started. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. I held her and stroked her hair and told her everything would be okay. We'd figure it out. We'd take care of her brother together. This was what people who loved each other did. They helped. They showed up. They put their money where their mouth was when it mattered. I'll transfer the money tonight, I said. What's the hospital information? She looked up at me with red eyes and mascara streaked down her cheeks. You would do that? Really? Of course I would do that. But what if? What if something happens to us? What if we break up and you hate me for taking your money? The question surprised me. Not because it was unreasonable. Lending money to romantic partners was always risky, but because it suggested she'd thought about us breaking up, that she'd considered the possibility our relationship might not last. We're not going to break up, I said, and even if we did, I'd still want your brother to be okay. She kissed me then, hard and desperate and grateful. I love you, she said against my lips. I love you so much. I love you too. That evening, I transferred 45,000 baht to the account she gave me. The extra 5,000 was for anything else they might need. Medications, follow-up appointments, time off work while he recovered. It was more money than I'd ever given anyone for anything, but it felt right. It felt like what love looked like when it stopped being just words and became action. Mylan was different that night. Softer, more present. She cooked dinner. Actually cooked, not just heated up something from the market, and we ate by candlelight like we were celebrating something. She told me stories about her brother, about growing up together after their parents died, about the promises she'd made to always take care of him. He wanted to be a doctor when he was little, she said, twirling noodles around her fork, always helping injured animals, always asking questions about how bodies work. Maybe he still can be. Maybe, if he recovers properly, if there's no permanent damage. We made love that night with an intensity that felt like gratitude and devotion and relief all mixed together. She whispered, "Thank you," against my neck over and over until I told her to stop thanking me. This was what partners did. This was what love meant. But lying there afterward with her curled against my side and her breathing slowly evening out into sleep, I felt something I couldn't name. Not regret. I didn't regret helping her brother. Not doubt. I still believed I'd done the right thing. Something else. Something that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing you'd walked farther than you'd intended. I pushed the feeling down and focused on the warmth of her body, the way her hair smelled like the jasmine shampoo she'd started buying, the soft sound she made when she was deeply asleep. This was worth it. She was worth it. Love meant taking risks, making sacrifices, showing up when people needed you most. 3 days later, when she mentioned that her brother needed additional physical therapy that wasn't covered by the original payment, I transferred another 20,000 baht without hesitation. When she cried again, thanking me and telling me I was the best man she'd ever known, I believed her. When she asked if we could keep the money transfers between us because she was embarrassed about needing help, I agreed. I was keeping a lot of things between us by then. The way she'd been different lately, the mysterious phone calls and long absences, the growing sense that I was falling deeper into something that might not catch me if I hit the bottom. But that night, the night she asked for help, and I gave it without question. I convinced myself that this was what love looked like. Messy and complicated and scary, but real. The kind of real that cost something. The kind of real that proved itself through action, not just words. I was wrong about almost everything, but I was right about one thing. It was real. Real manipulation, real deception, real heartbreak disguised as real love. The money I sent to save her brother's life went somewhere else entirely, but I wouldn't learn that for weeks. For now, I was still a man in love, still a man who believed that generosity and trust could transform two damaged people into something whole. The key turned differently in the lock that night. I was lying in bed reading when I heard her come home nearly 11:30, 3 hours later than she'd said she'd be. The deadbolt made a scraping sound it had never made before, like she was having trouble getting it to turn. "You okay out there?" I called. "Fine," came her voice through the door, but it sounded wrong, too bright, too careful, like she was performing fine instead of being fine. When she finally came into the bedroom, I looked up from my book and saw a stranger. Same face, same body, but something fundamental had shifted. Her hair was different, not just messy from the wind, but styled differently, like someone else had run their fingers through it. Her lipstick was gone, but there was a smudge of color on her collar that didn't match anything she owned. "How was your evening?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Good. Fine. Aunt Knock made dinner. We talked for hours." She was moving around the room as she spoke, gathering clothes for the shower, not looking at me. You know how she gets when she starts telling stories about the old days. I'd heard a lot about Aunt Knock's storytelling over the past few months, but I'd never heard any of the actual stories. Malin never seemed to remember them clearly enough to repeat them. They were always vague, something about the family, something about the past, something I wouldn't understand because it was a Thai thing. "What kind of stories tonight?" I asked. She paused, a clean t-shirt halfway to her chest. "Just family stuff, boring stuff. Try me, Ronald." She turned to face me, and her expression was tired in a way that had nothing to do with spending the evening listening to an elderly relative reminisce. "Can we not do this tonight?" "Do what?" "The questions. The interrogation." I wasn't interrogating her. I was asking about her day, the way couples do. But the fact that she interpreted normal conversation as interrogation told me everything I needed to know about her state of mind. She was defensive because she had something to defend against. "I'm just interested in your life," I said. I know you are. I'm just tired." She disappeared into the bathroom, and I heard the shower turn on. Then I heard her phone buzzing on the nightstand, the iPhone, the one she usually kept with her. When I glanced over, the screen was lighting up with notifications. Messages, but not in Thai, in English. My chest tightened. I'd promised myself I wouldn't snoop anymore, wouldn't check her phones or look through her messages or try to catch her in lies. But the phone was right there, and she was in the shower, and the messages kept coming, one after another after another. I could have ignored them, should have ignored them. Instead, I reached over and tilted the screen toward me. The messages were from someone named Pete. "Had fun tonight. You looked amazing. Can't wait to see you again soon." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. Pete, not a Thai name, not a family member, not anyone she'd ever mentioned in 4 months of living together. Pete, who'd had fun with her tonight while I was at home reading a book and waiting for her to come back from visiting her aunt. The shower was still running. I picked up the phone, hands shaking, and scrolled up through the conversation. Weeks of messages, dozens of them, all flirty and intimate, and suggesting a relationship that had nothing to do with family emergencies or cultural obligations or any of the explanations she'd been giving me for her mysterious absences. "Dinner was amazing. You're amazing. Miss you already. When can I see you again?" And her responses, in the voice I thought was reserved for me, "You're so sweet. I miss you too. Soon, I promise." I heard the shower stop and quickly put the phone back where I'd found it, screen dark, exactly as she'd left it. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure she'd be able to hear it when she came out of the bathroom. My hands were still shaking. My mouth tasted like metal. She emerged 5 minutes later wearing one of my t-shirts and a pair of underwear I'd never seen before. Expensive looking, lacy, nothing like the simple cotton ones she usually wore around the apartment. "Feel better?" I asked, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Much," she said, climbing into bed beside me. "Sorry I was cranky. Long day." She curled up against me, head on my chest, like everything was normal. Like she hadn't just spent the evening with someone named Pete while telling me she was having dinner with her elderly aunt. Like the phone on the nightstand wasn't full of evidence that our entire relationship was built on lies. I should have confronted her right then. Should have asked who Pete was and what kind of fun they'd had together and why she'd been lying to me for months about where she went and who she saw. But I was afraid. Afraid of the answers, afraid of the fight, afraid of what those answers might mean for us. Instead, I held her and tried to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Pete was a friend from work, from her old job at the cafe. Maybe the messages were old, left over from before we got serious. Maybe I was misunderstanding something, missing some context that would make everything make sense. "I love you," she said sleepily against my chest. "I love you too," I said back, but the words felt hollow. How do you love someone you don't trust? How do you trust someone who lies to you every day? I lay awake for hours that night, listening to her breathe, feeling like a stranger in my own bed. The woman sleeping beside me wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with. Or maybe she was exactly the woman I'd fallen in love with, and I'd just never seen her clearly before. When morning came, she was back to normal. Made coffee, kissed me goodbye, told me she'd be home by 6. But I watched her gather her things differently now, noticed how she checked her phone before putting it in her purse, saw the way she avoided my eyes when she said she loved me. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. I'd given this woman 65,000 baht for her brother's medical bills. I'd rearranged my life around her schedule, her needs, her mysterious family obligations. I'd trusted her with my heart and my home and my hope for a different future. And she was seeing someone named Pete, someone who took her to dinner and told her she looked amazing and couldn't wait to see her again soon. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was realizing that some part of me had always known. The late nights, the second phone, the refusal to introduce me to her family, I'd seen all the signs and chosen to ignore them because I was afraid of being alone again. Because I'd rather be lied to than abandoned. But knowing that about yourself doesn't make it hurt less. If anything, it makes it worse. Because now you're not just heartbroken, you're complicit in your own heartbreak. You're the fool who saw it coming and let it happen anyway. The electricity died at 7:30 that Thursday night, just as I was heating up dinner. One moment the apartment was humming with air conditioning and television noise, the next it was dead silent and dark. Power outages were common in Chiang Mai during rainy season, but this one felt different, ominous. "Probably be back on in an hour," I called to Malin, who was lying on the couch with her phone. She said, not looking up. The screen cast blue light on her face in the darkness, and I realized she'd been unusually quiet all afternoon, distracted. Checking messages constantly but not volunteering any information about who she was talking to or what was so urgent. I found candles in the kitchen drawer and lit them throughout the apartment, creating pools of warm light that made everything look softer, more romantic, like a dinner date instead of a power outage. But when I brought Mylin a candle for the living room, she was putting on her shoes. "Where are you going?" "Out," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I need to check on something." "In the dark? During a power outage?" "I have a flashlight on my phone. I'll be fine." Something cold settled in my chest. "Check on what?" She finally looked at me and her expression was different. Harder. Like she'd made a decision about something and was steeling herself to follow through. "I don't have to report my every movement to you, Ronald." The words hit like a slap. We'd had fights before, but she'd never spoken to me with that kind of casual cruelty, never dismissed me like I was an inconvenience instead of her boyfriend. I didn't say you did, I just asked where you were going, and I set out. She was at the door now, purse over her shoulder, keys in her hand. In the candlelight, I could see that she'd put on makeup, not the casual, comfortable look she wore around the apartment, but the careful, deliberate makeup she used to wear to work at the cafe. The makeup she wore when she wanted to look good for someone. Malin, wait. But she was already gone, door closing behind her with a finality that echoed in the silent apartment. I stood there for a moment, surrounded by flickering candles, trying to understand what had just happened. We'd been having a normal evening, quiet maybe, but not hostile. Then the power went out and suddenly she was dressed up and walking out into the dark without explanation or apology. I tried calling her 20 minutes later, straight to voicemail. Tried again, at 8:30, 9:30, each time, voicemail. Each time, the cold in my chest spread a little further. The power came back on at 10:15, flooding the apartment with harsh fluorescent light that made the candles look foolish and romantic. I blew them out and tried to settle into some semblance of normal evening routine, shower, book, bed, but I couldn't concentrate. Every sound from the hallway made me think she was coming home. Every minute that passed made her absence feel more deliberate. At midnight, I gave up pretending I wasn't worried and started looking through her things. Not proudly, not righteously, but desperately. The way you look through someone's things when you know they're lying to you, but you still need proof, still need to see the evidence with your own eyes before you can admit what you already know. Her laptop was password protected, but she'd left it open earlier and it was still logged in. I felt sick going through her browser history, but I did it anyway. Facebook, Instagram, Gmail accounts I didn't recognize. And then I found something that made my hands shake. Photos. Recent photos, uploaded to a private album just hours earlier. Malin in a hotel room I didn't recognize, wearing a dress I'd never seen. Malin laughing at dinner in a restaurant I'd never been to. Malin in a swimming pool with her arms around a man I'd never met. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and expensive-looking clothes. European, from his features. And he was holding her the way I held her, looking at her the way I looked at her, kissing her cheek in one photo like he had every right to do it. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, scrolling through image after image of my girlfriend living a completely different life. A life where she wore designer dresses and ate at fancy restaurants and spent nights in hotel rooms with men who could afford things I couldn't. A life that had nothing to do with family emergencies or cultural obligations, or any of the explanations she'd been feeding me for months. The timestamp on the photos was from 3 days ago. 3 days ago when she'd told me she was spending the night at Aunt Knox because the old woman was feeling sick and needed company. I'd made her soup to take along, worried about her being exposed to whatever bug was going around. Worried about her elderly relative while she was in a hotel pool with someone else's hands around her waist. I heard her key in the door at 1:30 and quickly closed the laptop, heart hammering. She came in quiet, trying not to wake me, but I was sitting on the couch in the dark living room, waiting. "You're up," she said, silhouetted in the doorway. "Where were you?" "I told you I had to check on something." "For 6 hours? During a power outage?" She turned on the lights and I could see her clearly now. The careful makeup was gone, but there were other signs. Her hair was messed in a way that suggested hands had been in it. Her lipstick was completely gone, but there was a faint mark on her neck, just above her collar, and she smelled different, like cologne I didn't recognize. "It turned into a longer thing than I expected," she said, not looking at me. "I ran into some people. We got food." "What people?" "Friends from work. From my old job." "Which friends?" "Ronald, why are you interrogating me?" "Because you disappeared for 6 hours without explanation, and you're lying about where you were." The words hung in the air between us, stark and accusatory. I hadn't planned to be so direct, but seeing those photos had stripped away my ability to pretend everything was normal. "I'm not lying." "Yes, you are. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see something shifting behind her eyes. Calculations being made, strategies being considered. Okay, fine. I wasn't with friends from work. I was with my cousin, my male cousin. He's visiting from Bangkok and wanted to show me around, see some of the nicer places in the city. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd be jealous. Your cousin? Yes. The cousin who was holding you in the swimming pool? Her face went white. What? I saw the photos, Malin. The hotel room, the restaurant, the pool. I saw all of it. For a moment, she looked like she might confess, might tell me the truth about who the man was and what she was doing with him, and how long she'd been lying to me. But then her expression hardened and she crossed her arms, shifting into defensive mode. You went through my computer? You've been lying to me for months. Those are old photos, from before I met you. They're dated 3 days ago. The dates are wrong. I just uploaded old photos. Photos of you wearing the dress you bought last week? It's not the same dress. We were both raising our voices now, circling each other in the living room like opponents instead of lovers. Every lie she told made me angrier, and every question I asked made her more defensive. But underneath my anger was something worse, the growing realization that she wasn't going to admit anything. She was going to keep lying until I either accepted the lies or ended the relationship. Who is he? I asked. My cousin. What's his name? You wouldn't know him. Try me. Somchai. Somchai what? I don't have to prove my family to you. Round and round we went, her deflecting every question, me getting more desperate with each non-answer. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I sat down on the couch and put my head in my hands. I can't do this anymore, I said. Do what? Pretend. Pretend I believe you. Pretend I don't see what's happening. Pretend we're in a real relationship when you're obviously seeing someone else. That's when she started crying. Real tears, not the performative crying from the hospital emergency. Tears that looked like genuine distress and remorse and fear. Ronald, no, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. She came over to the couch and knelt beside me, taking my hands in hers. I love you. I only love you. I know I've been secretive lately, but it's not what you think. It's complicated. Family stuff is complicated. Then explain it to me. I can't. Not yet, but I promise, I swear to you, there's no one else. There's only you. I wanted to believe her. God, how badly I wanted to believe her. This woman who'd made me feel valuable again, who'd called me her guardian, who'd cried in my arms and let me take care of her and made me feel like I had a purpose beyond just existing in exile. The photos are old, I promise. I know they look recent, but the dates got messed up when I transferred them from my old phone. I should have explained instead of getting defensive. And tonight? I really was checking on something. Family business. I'm sorry I was so secretive about it. She was crying harder now, and I could feel my resolve cracking. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. Maybe loving someone meant trusting them, even when trust felt impossible. I'm sorry, I heard myself saying. I'm sorry for going through your computer. I'm sorry for not trusting you. I forgive you, she whispered, kissing my hands. I forgive you. I understand why you were worried. We went to bed that night, holding each other like survivors of something catastrophic. She fell asleep quickly, emotionally exhausted from the fight, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I'd apologize to her. I'd apologize for catching her in lies, for discovering evidence of her deception, for refusing to accept explanations that didn't make sense. I'd apologize for not being naive enough to be properly manipulated. The worst part wasn't that she was lying to me. The worst part was that I was lying to myself, convincing myself that love meant accepting whatever story someone told you as long as they cried when they told it. That trust meant ignoring evidence in favor of hope. But I wasn't ready to face the truth yet. I was still too afraid of losing her, too afraid of being alone again, too invested in the fantasy of who I thought she was to admit who she really was. So I held her while she slept, and told myself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she'd be honest. Tomorrow we'd start over, and this time it would be real. I was wrong about that too. But at least I was finally starting to understand that I was wrong. That recognition, that small crack in my denial, was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. "Are you packed?" I asked her that Friday morning, watching her move around the apartment like she was looking for something she couldn't find. We were supposed to leave for Pi at 10 o'clock. A weekend trip I'd planned weeks earlier, back when I still believed that romantic getaways could fix whatever was broken between us. 2 nights in a mountain resort, hiking in hot springs and dinners by candlelight, a chance to get away from the apartment and the lies and the constant tension that had settled over us like humidity. "Almost," she said, but her suitcase was still empty on the bed. "I just need a few more minutes." I'd been packed since the night before. Clothes folded, toiletries organized, camera battery charged. I was excited about the trip in a way I hadn't been excited about anything in months. Maybe away from her mysterious family obligations and her second phone and whatever complicated web of relationships she was juggling, we could remember who we used to be together. Maybe we could start over. "The van leaves at 10, I reminded her. "If we miss it, the next one isn't until 2. "I know. She was checking her phone again, typing rapidly. "Just let me handle something first." Something. Always something with her now. Some urgent family matter or work emergency or problem that needed immediate attention. Problems that couldn't be explained or shared or postponed, even for a weekend away from the city. At 9:30, her suitcase was still empty, and she was still typing on her phone, brow furrowed in concentration. "Malin, 5 minutes. We need to leave now if we want to make the van." I said 5 minutes. There was an edge to her voice that made my chest tighten. The same edge from the night of the power outage, the same dismissive tone she'd been using more and more lately. Like I was an annoyance instead of her boyfriend. Like my concerns were unreasonable instead of practical. At 9:45, I loaded my bag into the taxi I'd called and waited for her to come downstairs. The driver kept checking his watch and muttering in Thai, probably about tourists who couldn't keep to a schedule. I called her twice. Both times it went to voicemail. At 10 o'clock, I made a decision that felt like giving up. I told the driver to take me to the bus station alone. The ride there was humiliating. Not just because I was traveling solo on what was supposed to be a romantic weekend, but because I was still making excuses for her in my head. Maybe there was a real emergency this time. Maybe her brother had a setback with his recovery. Maybe Aunt Knock really was sick and needed immediate care. But even as I thought these things, I knew they weren't true. I knew she wasn't coming because she'd never intended to come. The weekend trip wasn't a priority for her, because I wasn't a priority for her. Whatever else was happening in her life, whoever else was happening in her life, was more important than keeping promises to me. I waited at the bus station until 10:30, just in case. Checked my phone every 30 seconds, hoping for a text explaining everything, apologizing, saying she was on her way. Nothing. Finally, I bought a single ticket and took the window seat we were supposed to share. Pi was beautiful and lonely, the kind of beautiful that makes you ache when you don't have anyone to share it with. I hiked alone, ate alone, sat by the hotel pool alone, watching couples who actually seemed to enjoy each other's company. Every sunset and mountain view and perfect photo opportunity felt like evidence of what I was missing, what I'd thought I had but apparently never did. I called her Saturday evening from the hotel balcony, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. "Where are you?" she answered, like she didn't know. "Pi. Where we were supposed to be together." "Oh, right, I'm sorry. Something came up with my family." "What came up?" "It's complicated. Everything's complicated with you." Silence on the other end. Then, "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Name one thing about your life that you've ever explained to me clearly. One person I've met. One place you've taken me. One problem you've shared with me completely." "Ronald, you're being dramatic." Dramatic. That's what she called it when I asked for honesty or consistency or the basic courtesy of showing up when we made plans. dramatic. "When I get back," I said, "we need to talk. Really talk." "Fine, we'll talk." But her voice was already distant, distracted, like she was saying whatever would end the conversation quickest so she could get back to whatever was more important than apologizing for standing me up. I spent Sunday alone too, walking through pies markets and temples, trying to figure out what I was going to say when I got home. How do you tell someone you love that you don't trust them anymore? How do you ask someone to choose you when you're not sure you want to be chosen by them? The bus ride back to Chiang Mai gave me 4 hours to think, and by the time I walked into our apartment that evening, I'd decided to end it. Cleanly, kindly, but definitively. I couldn't live like this anymore. Constantly suspicious, constantly disappointed, constantly feeling like I was fighting for scraps of attention from someone who'd rather be anywhere else. But the apartment was empty. No Malin, no note, no explanation, just silence, and the lingering scent of the perfume she wore when she was going somewhere that mattered to her. I waited, made dinner for one, watched television, checked my phone obsessively. At 11 o'clock, I texted her, "Where are you?" At midnight, "Are you okay?" At 1 a.m., "Please just let me know you're safe." Nothing. Radio silence. Like I didn't exist. Like my worry didn't matter. Like the fact that I just spent a weekend alone because of her didn't warrant even basic communication. I slept badly and woke up to an empty bed in an empty apartment. Her clothes were still in the closet, her toiletries still in the bathroom, but somehow the space felt hollow, like she was already gone, even though her things remained. Tuesday morning, 48 hours after I'd returned from our abandoned trip, I got a text. "Need space to think. We'll be staying elsewhere for a while." That was it. No apology for disappearing, no explanation of what she needed to think about, no timeline for when she might want to communicate like an adult, just "need space" and radio silence. I stared at the message for a long time, sitting at the kitchen table where we used to eat breakfast together, where she used to tell me about her dreams and her family and her plans for the future. Plans that had apparently never included me, not really. That's when I realized it was over. Not because of the missed trip or the mysterious absences or even the photos of her with another man. It was over because someone who loves you doesn't disappear when things get difficult. Someone who loves you doesn't abandon you without explanation when you ask for honesty. Someone who loves you shows up. The apartment felt enormous that night, full of spaces where she used to be. I made myself dinner and ate it while staring at the empty chair across from me, the empty side of the couch, the empty half of the bed I'd been sharing for 4 months. I didn't call her or text her or try to find her. For the first time since we'd met, I didn't chase after her when she pulled away. I just sat in the silence she'd left behind and tried to understand how I'd become the kind of man who begged for basic respect from someone who clearly had no respect to give. The last trip we never took. That's how I think of it now. Not as the weekend that broke us, but as the moment I finally stopped pretending we could be fixed. The moment I stopped making excuses for someone who'd never bothered to make any for herself. 3 days later, I would learn the truth about where she'd been and who she'd been with. But even before I knew the details, I knew enough. I knew that love doesn't feel like this, desperate and uncertain and constantly disappointed. I knew that I deserved better. Finally, after 4 months of accepting less, I knew I deserved better. The photo arrived on Wednesday morning while I was drinking coffee at the same cafe where we'd met. Tina, one of Malin's former co-workers, sat down across from me without invitation and slid her phone across the table. "I'm sorry," she said in careful English, "but I think you should see this." I almost didn't look. I'd spent 3 days in a kind of peaceful numbness, not calling Malin, not trying to find her, just existing in the quiet space her absence had created. Part of me wanted to stay in that space, to let whatever was happening happen without having to witness it. But I looked. The photo showed Malin on the back of a motorcycle, arms wrapped around a man I'd never seen before. They were stopped at a traffic light, both wearing helmets, but I could see enough of her face to know it was her, and I could see enough of him to know he wasn't Thai. European, maybe 60, silver-haired. Expensive motorcycle, expensive clothes, expensive watch visible on the hand gripping the handlebars. The same man from the hotel photos I'd found on her laptop, though I hadn't gotten a good look at his face then. "Who is he?" I asked. "Pierre," Tina said. "He owns the coffee shop chain. 3 locations in Chiang Mai, 2 in Bangkok." Pierre. Not Pete from the text messages. That must have been a nickname, or maybe there were multiple men I didn't know about. Pierre, who owned a business empire while I scraped by on savings from selling my house in Edmonton. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe 2 months, maybe longer." Tina looked uncomfortable, like she regretted getting involved. She asked me not to say anything, said it was complicated. Complicated. Her favorite word for anything she didn't want to explain. "Is she living with him?" "I think so. I saw them at the market yesterday, shopping together, like," she gestured vaguely, "like a couple, like people who share a house." I stared at the photo until the details blurred together. 2 months. While she was living in my apartment, sleeping in my bed, taking my money for her brother's medical bills, she was building a relationship with someone else. Someone who could give her things I couldn't. Security, luxury, a future that didn't depend on the dwindling bank account of a middle-aged expat with no prospects. "The brother," I said suddenly. "The hospital bills." Tina frowned. "What brother?" "Her brother. The one who was in the motorcycle accident. Malin doesn't have a brother. She's an only child." The words hit me like a physical blow. No brother. No siblings to support, no family emergency, no medical bills. Just lies, carefully constructed and delivered with tears and gratitude and promises of love. 65,000 baht, nearly 2,000 Canadian dollars, given to help someone who didn't exist pay for treatment he didn't need. "You're sure?" "I've known her for 3 years, Tina said gently. "She talks about her parents sometimes, but never siblings, never a brother." I handed the phone back and sat in silence for a moment, trying to process the scope of what had been done to me. It wasn't just infidelity or even emotional manipulation. It was fraud. Systematic, calculated theft disguised as love and family obligation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're a good man," Tina said. "And she's not a good person. She's done this before with other expats. Always the same. Family emergency, money needed, disappears when someone better comes along. Other expats. I wasn't special, wasn't chosen, wasn't loved. I was a mark in a pattern of behavior that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. She'd identified me as lonely and generous and naive enough to believe whatever story she sold me. How many others? I don't know exactly. But Pierre isn't her first upgrade. Upgrade. That's what I was to her. A temporary arrangement until something better came along. A man with enough money to be useful but not enough to be permanent. A placeholder. I thanked Tina and walked home in a daze. The photo burned into my mind. Malin with her arms around another man, helmet off and hair flowing behind her, looking happier than I'd seen her look in months. Looking free. That evening, I went through the apartment methodically, gathering everything that belonged to her. Clothes, toiletries, the expensive perfume she wore when she was going to see him. Books in Thai I'd bought her, hoping she'd translate the stories for me. Jewelry I'd given her for her birthday, still in its boxes because she said she was saving it for special occasions. I packed it all into the suitcase she'd never filled for our trip to Pai and left it by the door. Not out of anger. I was too tired for anger, but out of necessity. I needed her gone, completely gone from my space and my life. The next morning, I changed the locks. The locksmith was a young Thai man who spoke excellent English and didn't ask questions about why a foreigner was changing locks on an apartment that obviously housed 2 people until the day before. I also closed the bank account I'd been using to send her money and opened a new one, changed my phone number. deleted her from social media, blocked her email address, removed every digital connection that might tempt me to reach out or give her a way to reach me. It felt like performing surgery on my own life, cutting away the infected parts before they could spread. Painful, but necessary. That afternoon, I deleted her number from my phone without ceremony. No angry text, no demand for explanations, no attempt to get my money back. Just deletion, erasure. The digital equivalent of accepting that some losses are so complete that trying to recover from them only makes them worse. I thought about Pierre, wondered if he knew about me, or if he thought he was her only boyfriend. Wondered if she'd told him about a sick brother who needed money, if he'd opened his wallet as easily as I had. Probably not. Men who own businesses don't get there by being gullible. Men who own businesses know how to spot a con. But men who are lonely and recently divorced and desperate for someone to care about them, men like that are easy targets. Men like that volunteer to be used. The worst part wasn't losing her. The worst part was realizing how thoroughly I'd been played, how every intimate moment and loving gesture had been calculated to keep me invested in a relationship that existed only in my imagination. She was never my girlfriend. I was her mark. But as I sat in the empty apartment that night, surrounded by the spaces where her things used to be, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in months, I didn't have to wonder where she was or who she was with, or whether she was lying to me. I knew where she was, with Pierre, living the life she'd actually wanted while pretending to want life with me. The performance was over. The audience of one had finally left the theater. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something better than what I'd lost. I disappeared for 6 weeks. Not dramatically, not with announcements or explanations to the expat community that would inevitably gossip about another foreign man undone by a Thai woman. I just stopped showing up places, stopped answering calls from the few people who'd become acquaintances in my 2 years here. Instead, I went to places where no one knew my story. Small towns in the mountains where the only foreigners were backpackers passing through, and elderly European men who'd been here so long they spoke Thai better than English. Places where I could sit in anonymous restaurants and eat anonymous meals and not worry about running into anyone who might ask how Malin was doing. I rented a motorbike, a beat-up Honda that struggled on the mountain roads but got me where I needed to go. Every morning I'd pick a direction and ride until I found somewhere that looked peaceful. Temple complexes where the only sounds were chanting monks and wine through ancient trees. Waterfalls where I could sit on rocks and listen to water falling into pools that had been carved by centuries of patience. In a village called Mae Kampong, I found a guest house run by an elderly woman who spoke no English and didn't seem curious about why a middle-aged Canadian wanted to stay for 2 weeks in a place with no attractions except silence and clean air. She served me rice and curry twice a day and left me alone to figure out what came next. I stopped checking my phone constantly, stopped jumping every time it buzzed with a notification that might be from her. Gradually, I stopped carrying it at all. If someone needed to reach me, they could wait. If there was an emergency, I'd find out when I found out. The first week was the hardest. Every quiet moment filled itself with memories of her voice, her laugh, the way she looked when she first woke up in the morning. I'd catch myself looking for her in crowds, expecting to see her face among the vendors at local markets. My body was still programmed to miss her, even though my mind knew better. But after a week, something shifted. The constant background anxiety I'd been carrying for months, the worry about where she was, who she was with, whether she was lying to me, began to fade. I realized I'd been holding my breath for so long I'd forgotten what normal breathing felt like. I started writing in a notebook I'd bought at a 7-Eleven. Nothing profound or poetic, just observations about the places I was visiting and the people I met. An old man who fed stray dogs every morning outside a temple in Doi Saket. A group of university students who invited me to share their table at a noodle shop and spent an hour teaching me Thai curse words. A woman at a market who gave me extra mangoes because she said I looked too thin. Small interactions with people who wanted nothing from me except maybe some company or conversation. People who weren't performing kindness to get something in return, who weren't calculating the value of every smile or gesture. I'd forgotten relationships could be simple, that human connection didn't have to feel like a transaction. In a town called San Kamphaeng, I spent 3 days helping an Australian man named Jim rebuild a fence around his property. He'd been in Thailand for 15 years, married to a Thai woman who taught at the local school, raising her daughter from a previous relationship as his own. They invited me for dinner, and I watched them together. Comfortable, teasing, genuine in ways that made my chest ache, with recognition of what I'd thought I had, but never did. "You seem like you're running from something," Jim said on my last night, as we sat on his porch drinking Chang beer and watching fireflies. "Maybe running towards something," I said. "Same thing, usually." He didn't push for details, didn't offer unsolicited advice about Thai women or expat relationships or any of the other topics that dominated conversations in Chiang Mai's foreign community. He just nodded and we sat in comfortable silence until I said goodnight and went back to my guest house. By the 4th week, I wasn't thinking about her every day. By the 5th, I could go whole afternoons without remembering she existed. The space she'd occupied in my head was filling with other things. The taste of som tam made by someone's grandmother in a village whose name I couldn't pronounce. The sound of rain on tin roofs. The particular quality of light at sunset when you're sitting alone on a mountain and feeling grateful for the solitude instead of lonely in it. I started eating properly again. Not just eating to fuel my body, but actually tasting food, appreciating meals, taking time to enjoy the experience instead of rushing through it. I bought fruit from roadside vendors and ate it sitting on temple steps, savoring the sweetness of ripe mango and the tartness of green papaya salad. In the evenings, I'd find local restaurants where I was the only customer and practice my limited Thai with servers who were patient with my pronunciation and generous with their smiles when I got words right. These weren't performances or manipulations. They were just people being kind to a stranger who was trying to be polite in their language. I gained weight, slept better, stopped jumping at unexpected sounds. The hypervigilance that had become second nature during my months with Mylan, constantly scanning for signs of deception or danger, gradually relaxed. I remembered what it felt like to trust my own perceptions, instead of constantly second-guessing them. One morning in week 6, I woke up in a guest house in Mae Hong Son and realized I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year: peace. Not happiness exactly, not the euphoric rush of new love or successful revenge, but simple peace. The quiet satisfaction of being alone with yourself and finding that company adequate. That's when I knew it was time to go back to Chiang Mai. Not because I'd solved anything or reached some profound conclusion about my life, but because I'd remembered who I was when I wasn't desperately trying to be someone else's idea of worth loving. The ride back took all day, winding mountain roads that gave me plenty of time to think about what I'd return to. The same apartment, the same cafe where we'd met, the same expat community where everyone would eventually hear some version of my story. But I was different now. 6 weeks of silence and solitude had burned away the desperate need for validation that had made me such an easy target. I was still lonely. I'd probably always be lonely, but lonely felt manageable now. Lonely felt better than being lied to. As I rode into Chiang Mai that evening, the city lights spreading out below me like a constellation, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her for deceiving me, not at myself for being deceived, not at the universe for arranging things so that good people got hurt by bad people with depressing regularity. I was just tired. Tired of carrying anger and hurt and resentment around like stones in my pockets, ready to put them down and see what life felt like when I traveled lighter. I walked past the cafe yesterday, not intentionally. I was coming back from the market with groceries, taking my usual route home, and there it was. Same corner, same sign, same tables on the sidewalk where I used to sit and wait for her to bring me coffee and touch my hand and make me feel like someone worth caring about. Through the window, I could see the counter where she used to work, now occupied by a young man I didn't recognize. The whole place looked different, brighter, busier, like it had moved on from whatever version of itself existed when she was part of it. I didn't stop or look for her. or feel the old familiar twist of hope and dread in my chest. I just kept walking, the way you walk past any place that used to matter to you and doesn't anymore. That night, sitting in my apartment, still the same apartment, though I'd rearranged the furniture and bought new sheets, and painted over the scuff marks on the wall where her suitcase used to sit, I thought about what had changed in the 8 months since she left. I'd learned to cook properly, for one thing, not just heating up food from the night market, but actually preparing meals from ingredients I chose myself. Pad krapow that was too spicy because I liked it that way. Tom yum with extra lime because no one was there to complain it was too sour. Simple pleasures, but mine. I'd made friends. Real ones. Jim from San Kamphaeng came to Chiang Mai once a month for supplies, and we'd meet for dinner talking about everything except the reasons I'd originally disappeared into the mountains. A neighbor named Tor, who helped me practice Thai, and didn't seem to think my pronunciation was hopeless. Even Tina from the cafe, who'd become someone I could have coffee with without feeling like we were bonding over shared damage. I'd started reading again, books I chose because they interested me rather than because they might make me seem interesting to someone else. I'd taken up photography, nothing professional, just wandering around the city with a camera and capturing moments that struck me as worth remembering. Monks collecting alms at dawn. Market vendors arranging their produce, like art installations. Old couples sharing breakfast at sidewalk restaurants, comfortable in their silence. Last month, I'd even been on something that could generously be called a date. Anna, a German woman who taught English at the international school. We'd met at a gallery opening, talked about art and travel and the particular loneliness of being foreign in a place you love but don't entirely understand. She was smart and funny and interested in me for reasons that seemed to have nothing to do with what I could provide for her. Nothing came of it. We were both too cautious, too aware of our own capacity for poor romantic choices, but it was proof that I could sit across from someone and have a conversation without constantly analyzing their motives or wondering what they really wanted from me. "You seem different," Tor had said to me a few weeks ago. More, how do you say, yourself. More myself. That felt right. For months with Mylan, I'd been someone else, a more generous version of myself, a more trusting version, a more desperate version. Someone who confused being needed with being loved, who mistook manipulation for intimacy, who thought that if you just gave enough of yourself to someone, they'd eventually have to give something real back. But people don't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. You can't earn love through sacrifice or purchase it with kindness or secure it with constant vigilance. Either it's there or it isn't, and pretending otherwise only leads to the kind of exhaustion I'd felt in those final weeks, when every interaction felt like a negotiation, and every moment of happiness came with the underlying fear that it was temporary. These days, when people ask about my time with Malin, and occasionally they do, because the expat community here is small and gossip travels fast, I tell them the same thing. She needed something I couldn't be. It's not the whole truth, but it's not a lie either. She needed someone with more money, more status, more ability to provide the kind of life she actually wanted rather than the life she'd been willing to pretend to want. She needed someone less observant, less questioning, more willing to accept surface explanations for complex deceptions. Or maybe she didn't need anything at all from a romantic partner except their temporary usefulness. Maybe the whole concept of need was wrong, and she was simply someone who took what was available and moved on when something better presented itself. A survivor in a world that doesn't reward sentiment or loyalty or any of the qualities I'd mistaken for universal values. But then I add, usually after a pause, the part that took me the longest to understand: I wasn't used, I volunteered. That's the hardest truth, the one that took me months to accept. Nobody forced me to transfer money to accounts I'd never verified for a brother I'd never met. Nobody made me ignore the red flags, or rationalize the inconsistencies, or choose hope over evidence when the evidence was screaming at me to pay attention. I volunteered for all of it. I volunteered to be naive because naivety felt better than loneliness. I volunteered to be deceived because deception disguised as love felt better than honest solitude. I volunteered to give more than I received, because the alternative was admitting I had nothing to give that anyone actually wanted. There's something liberating about owning that responsibility. Not because I deserved what happened to me, but because accepting my role in it means I have power over whether it happens again. I can choose differently next time. I can recognize the warning signs because I've seen them before. I can trust my instincts instead of overruling them with wishful thinking. The money doesn't matter anymore. 65,000 baht felt enormous when I was sending it, but it was just money. The real cost was the months I spent twisted into knots of suspicion and denial. The energy I wasted trying to solve puzzles that were designed to have no solution. The way I abandoned my own judgment in favor of someone else's manipulation. That was expensive in ways that had nothing to do with currency exchange rates. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Pierre, whether he's still with her, or whether he became another story she tells to the next lonely expat who mistakes her attention for affection. I hope he figured it out faster than I did. I hope he was smart enough not to volunteer. But mostly, I don't think about her at all anymore. She's become like a fever I had once, unpleasant while it lasted, but ultimately just something that happened to me rather than something that defines me. A story I can tell without flinching, a mistake I can acknowledge without shame. These days, my life is smaller but more honest. I know where I stand with the people in it because I've learned to choose people who tell the truth about where they stand with me. I've learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between solitude and isolation, between independence and the kind of desperate self-reliance that makes you vulnerable to anyone who offers to share the load. I've learned that the opposite of being used isn't being loved. The opposite of being used is being seen clearly and chosen anyway by someone who doesn't need you to be anyone other than exactly who you are. I haven't found that yet. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I know now that I'd rather be alone and honest than together and lying to myself about what together actually means. The cafe where we met is just a cafe now. The apartment where we lived is just a place where I sleep and eat and read books and plan trips to mountains where the air is clean and the silence is comfortable. The city where I thought I was building a life with someone else is just the city where I learned to build a life with myself. And that's enough. For the first time in longer than I can remember, that's enough. Walking home yesterday, past the cafe and through the streets where we used to walk together, I felt something I'd forgotten was possible. Gratitude. Not for what happened. I wouldn't wish that particular education on anyone, but for what I learned from it. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Strong enough to survive betrayal. Strong enough to start over. Strong enough to sit with loneliness until it transforms into solitude. Strong enough to choose truth over comfort, reality over fantasy, self-respect over the illusion of being loved. I learned that love isn't something you can earn through good behavior or purchase through generosity or secure through constant vigilance. It's something that exists or doesn't, independent of your efforts to deserve it. And I learned that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, because everyone else might leave, but you're stuck with you forever. You might as well make peace with that person. You might as well learn to enjoy their company. I tell myself these things now, on quiet evenings in my apartment that finally feels like home, in this city that finally feels like a choice I made rather than a place I fled to. I tell myself that some experiences have to break you open before you can understand what you're really made of. I tell myself that I volunteered for my own education and now I'm educated. The tuition was steep, but the lessons were valuable. I tell myself that the story isn't about the woman who left with someone else. It's about the man who learned to stay with himself. And finally, after 8 months of healing and 6 weeks of solitude and countless conversations with the person I am when nobody else is watching, I believe it.